we need to shrink our food chain down to a more manageable size. Like we have like national and global food chains where we need to really build in the middle, that regional food chain, in order to prioritize mid-sized farmers. We have a lot of really amazing small-scale farmers, and then we've got a small number of really, really big farmers. We need to get that middle, and that's where regenerative really thrives. I mean, not that it can't on small and large scales, but it can really thrive in that middle ground. The everyday family farmer, people like my parents, for instance, their size of farm. So getting systems in place to get their offputs from the farm into the food system without going into that national global chain.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Hello and welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast that invites you to care more about specific social and environmental issues so we can create a better world together. I'm your host, Corinna Bellizzi. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by an award-winning author and journalist whose work champions women's leadership in regenerative agriculture. Stephanie Anderson is the author of From the Ground Up, The Women Revolutionizing Regenerative Agriculture. She's also the series co-editor of Our Regenerative Future with University of Nebraska Press and a professor of creative nonfiction at Florida Atlantic University. Stephanie's mission is deeply aligned with our own to ensure everyone has access to nutritious food, grown sustainably, and produced by people who earn a living wage, a real income. We'll explore how women are leading this charge and how regenerative agriculture is not only about the soil beneath your feet, but also about social justice and storytelling. And a quick reminder before we begin, thanks to our collaboration with forestplanet.org, we're planting a tree for every new subscriber to this podcast, whether it be on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or our newsletter on caremorebebetter.com. That's up to 4 trees per listener if you really wanted to go do all of those things. And this can help us build a more regenerative future. Now, I want to just go ahead and share the news as we're recording this episode on May Day, May 1st. April is our best month yet in getting new subscribers to the show. We did plant 3,457 trees. Our goal for the year is 20,000. At this rate, we're going to scream past that. So far to date, we're at 8,840. So really hats off to all of you for helping to make this happen. With that, Stephanie Anderson, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I loved coming across your book. Your team had reached out to me and then I wasn't getting an answer. I had to kind of go, wait, what's happening? I think things were getting lost in the shuffle, but this is a relatively new book. I wanted to first just talk with you about what inspired you to write it and how did your own roots as a farm girl shape your journey into journalism and regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, so you're right. I grew up on a farm and ranch out in South Dakota. My family still owns and operates the ranch. I love going back there, but it really did shape my, my worldview and just sort of, the experience of growing up on the farm. You live close to nature. You live close to, the ecosystem, and I just kind of carried that with me throughout my college career and then through getting my MFA. And I knew I wanted to write about what was going on in farm country. So I wrote a book before this, and that looked at regenerative agriculture as well. But this one really was born out of the pandemic because like so many people, I'm sure many of your listeners, the food system absolutely collapsed, right? Like it really didn't stand up to that kind of shock. And so once it was, watching that happen and once it was safe to travel, I thought, I need to figure out who's working to address this problem and is regenerative involved. And so the more I looked, the more women I found in that system working to make it better. And that's where this book came from.
Well, it's not at all surprising to me that it is the women behind the movement that are making these things change. I want to remind people, it wasn't just toilet paper that was suddenly out of stock. It was hard to even get that brand of rice that you're used to picking up, simply because not only was food not getting picked, it wasn't getting shipped. Containers were filled with PPE, and it's hard to believe that at this point we were in the mix of it 5 years ago. But it was world changing at the time, and it killed a ton of retail stores. It meant that we got more disconnected from our local economies. Things like farmers markets were forcing you to even wear masks while you went through farmers markets and the open air environment, because we just knew so little about how transmissible this was in the beginning. So I think it really just disrupted our connection to one another and also our connection to food.
Yeah, and it did. It really made food front and center in a way that we haven't really had to think about it in a while, especially when it came to availability, but also just sort of this notion of thinking about where food comes from, because suddenly that we had to think about, okay, well, does it need to be shipped across the country? Where is it coming from? Can I get it? And one silver lining of that is that people did realize, like, hey, I don't know my local farmers as well as I should. I need to get to know them. If I can't get beef at the store, I need to figure out where my local providers are, my local farmers and ranchers that are doing that, and I can get what I need and also meet these people and get some of that connection restored that we've lost over the years. So I hope that spirit, I saw evidence of that spirit continuing, afterward as the pandemic started to recede. And I hope that people just keep that in mind as we get further and further from that event.
Well, this also begs the question. I realize that this is not your first book. You wrote another book, One Size Fits None, which also tackled regenerative ag. How has your perspective evolved between these two works? And I'm just hoping to kind of get that through line from you.
Well, I just feel like so many others that climate change is just roaring forward, and our farmers are like in the crosshairs of that. And the question of how to adapt our system is just so paramount. So that's a concern that runs through both of the books, and kind of another big angle or impetus, I guess, for writing them is because I just really want farmers to have the information, consumers to have information and stories about what it means to make that transition. And where my thinking has really evolved was just noticing the diversity in the movement, because the movement, and rightly so, too often we go to the kind of the white male in the room to be the authority on regen ag, and that is absolutely not the case. There's incredibly talented, wonderful, smart men out there, of course, but often we need to look to
almost all of the people I've interviewed on the topic of regenerative agriculture are men, almost all. And there are a few women, but usually it's from a very specific lens. Like, for instance, somebody who's working in regenerative textiles, or someone else who is really trying to champion the decline in the use of pesticides like glyphosate. For instance, when I interviewed Kelly Ryerson, Glyphosate Girl, otherwise known as Glyphosate Girl, she's also in that film Common Ground. Another common thread you'll see in Common Ground is all the farmers that are represented are white men,
Yeah.
For the most part. You have Leah Penniman, I think, is the only person that doesn't fit that.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I will admit that I fell victim to that same cycle in my first book too. I looked to men when I was doing the research for that book. And so then when I was looking at the system again, I was way more not open-minded, but intentional rather, and just looking around to make sure I wasn't missing something that was there all along. And so, yeah, absolutely. Like, when I would start to ask questions of my sources, who should I talk to about this topic? Who should I talk to about this? I was getting referrals to women from men and women alike, always in so many cases referring me to other women in the system, or women that, the men were partnering with as well. So yeah, it really was an exciting journey. And just to get into this idea that regenerative agriculture is not new. Like, it is Indigenous agriculture, it is Afro-American agriculture, it is Asian, Hispanic agriculture from all around the world that relies on sustainability. And so we're just using modern tools to apply it. But this thinking goes way back, which is exciting.
It's how we used to farm before we invented the plow, right?
Yeah.
Now, when the plow came about, I'm first an anthropologist and an archaeologist. So, I've done a lot of thinking about our pasts, and when we look at things like the plow really did enable us to change how we farmed, to maintain larger groups, and to grow as a species in a different way than we had in the past, because we weren't as limited by balancing the natural world, by living within the balance of the natural world. And now we're starting to stare straight down that gun barrel to the reality we've created by divorcing ourselves from that balance, the natural balance of the world. And so as we seek to rebuild and renew how we are farming, we're coming up against this idea that plowing is just how it's done, when it destroys the topsoil and often means that it will blow away. I just watched Common Ground again last night. And as a reminder for everybody, Common Ground and Kiss the Ground are now available streaming on Amazon. You can watch them with commercials or pay more and not watch it, but you can watch it for free now. And that film does highlight, the atrocity that can occur if you have a windstorm or a rain event come through right after you've plowed ground with nothing covering the ground. And so this can highlight for us the challenge and sharp relief that we have created. We're creating the new Dust Bowl, and that is something that is avoidable if we can really start to think more about how farming can sit within the natural world. And we're developing techniques now to be able to do that at scale, the same output and even more output, and healthier crop yields, and better budgetary constraints for the farmers, because they're not spending so much on pesticides or other things like, having to plow numerous times and things along those lines. There's so much to talk about today. So I want to get into the regenerative lens overall. I was hoping that you could highlight just first your definition of what regeneration means, as you talk about women across diverse geographies and farm types, and how they uniquely define and embody that regeneration beyond soil health.
Yeah, so regenerative agriculture and just regeneration in general is really just based on diversity, and diversity is nature's default. You don't find monocultures, you don't find like command and control systems in nature, and because nature is relying on balance and coexistence and interdependence, things like that. So that to me is the root of regenerative, and the farm starts to become part of the natural world. It operates like it would, like part of the ecology around it, and having a positive impact, that codependence between the farm and nature. And so that looks like things like what you said, minimizing soil disturbance, no-till when possible, and just minimal soil disturbance to keep that soil in place and also healthy, because not only does soil blow away, but it can get degraded, it can lose, obviously that releases carbon as well, so that it doesn't store water very well when it's degraded like that. So, minimizing soil disturbance is super important. But beyond that, we can look at things like keeping a living root in the ground all the time, bringing animals and more diversity, species diversity back to the farm, whether in terms of crops and livestock and more. It means a healthy bottom line, regenerative communities that can thrive economically, farm families that can thrive economically rather than scraping by every single year, losing the next generation, who doesn't want to farm into sort of a, paycheck to paycheck or in debt all the time. And it's also just about nutrition too, in a way that, diversity in the soil and on the land, and it has outcomes in nutrient density, and that is super important, so that we're healthy on so many different levels. And that kind of just, we're in a time right now where everyone's like, oh, hand wringing about the definition of regenerative, and it's coming together. Like, there's a woman in my book, Tina Owens, who says, this is how movements get started. We're building consensus, and the nice thing about regenerative too is that it's adaptable to environments, which is way better than the alternative that we've been doing, which is the industrial one-size-fits-all approach. And that clearly doesn't work, because nature just does not work that way. So, we're starting to build that consensus, but that's kind of how broadly I identify it and define it in the book.
Now, I'm happy to hear you talk about that for a moment, because if people do go and watch Common Ground, and this is, let's say, one of their first introductions to regenerative agriculture, they're going to see things like how we're getting it wrong because we're fighting too much, or regeneration means farming like this and not like that. And here's very much the box that it has to be within. And then you have people like Gabe Brown saying, look, I want to get more farmers doing this right now, not next year, not next week, like right now, because the time is now. We need to make these changes quickly. So I need to bring them in and go through stages. And I'm not going to require that they ever get 100% organic certified, because that's just not practical for some of these farmers, especially from where they sit now. And if they are to go ahead and come into the fold and they think about organic one way, they've essentially been indoctrinated to think that organic is just a silly construct that's liberal in nature and doesn't really mean output of sizable yield. Like, it's going to somehow negatively impact them if they're fully organic. They've become so dependent in a way, psychologically, as well as real and their real farming technologies, on the chemicals that they've used. So they can't see another path forward. And I think it's really astute to know that you need to be flexible in these times. I have had the pleasure of meeting Tim LaSalle in person and talking to him about this particular issue. He was critical of the Regenerative Organic Alliance, which is out there now talking about regenerative organic certified, right? Saying, like, if you require everybody to be organic, it's just not practical in the beginning. We need to move fast. We need to move together, and we can create these pockets of work with time. At the same time, I see the perspective of we should all be marching towards organic first too, because glyphosate is such a challenge just overall, and the health implications, getting into our water tables, it's in our water cycle, it's in the rain, it's, in breast milk. These are problems, right? So there's always two sides to that story. And if we're going to measurably make a difference when it comes to climate change, we need to move quicker. If we're going to protect our topsoil, we need to move quicker. At any rate, I wanted to also share something. This is a prior episode where I had interviewed Carol Levine and Ken Lee. They have a company called Lotus Brands, and they work with a lot of small crop farmers who do all sorts of wild rices and things like that. And so they were very much, as Regenerative Organic Alliance came forward trying to build the ROC certification, which is, kind of like a top tier level certification. You have to first be organic, and then you can get the regeneration certification. They advocated for those small crop farmers, and were able to get the ROC certification to reflect that, so that some of these smaller crop farmers who don't have the same assets available and who are doing more of the work as manual labor than machine labor were able to also qualify. There is no one size fits all approach. So I think this again goes back to your earlier book.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it's great that you mentioned Lotus Foods. I didn't talk to the owners, but I did talk to a woman named Esther Park, who is the fund manager at Cienega Capital, who provided Lotus Foods with some capital when they were working to build their brand. And it was a critical tool that they needed. So it goes to show that you can be part of the movement in a lot of different ways. Maybe you're not a farmer, that's totally fine, but you can still, work in something like the venture capital space or the financing space, and use your skills that way to, help someone else advance the regenerative movement and move it forward in your own special way too. So that's a neat connection between those guests and the book, actually.
So I understand you've talked a bit about regenerative agriculture from that equity lens and income. How are the women in your book living out this ideal, and how are they financing their ventures?
Yeah, that's a great question. So every single person that I profile in the book has like a baseline value of, we need to do work that prioritizes the environment and our communities and our families. And we need to work on this issue of climate change, and we need to, get our health we need to improve our health through food. So like that's kind of like a baseline value. So how they enact it is different for each. I'll give you a couple examples. One of my favorite opening chapters, or one of my favorite people in the opening chapters, is Kelsey, a woman named Kelsey. She lives in South Dakota. She is operating on the Cheyenne reservation out there, and that's where her ranch is located. And so she's managing and stewarding Indigenous lands alongside her family, but she is, the mastermind of a lot of these practices. And so she's relying on this, kind of innate wisdom of stewardship ethics and kind of, the Indigenous ways of land management, things like intentional burns or moving the buffalo around, being kind of like past practices that kind of filter their way into her management, but maybe in a different form, maybe through a rotational grazing, for instance, to mimic that buffalo movement. And so that's great. That's one example that was really inspiring for me. Another is a mother-daughter duo in North Carolina, and they are working on land that's been in their family for over 100 years, and it's been passed down. And this is land that was, owned by their great, however many greats. It's in the book. I can't remember off the top of my head. Grandfather who was enslaved, and that land, he managed to get it in his name that he purchased, and that has stayed in the family ever since. And so it just has so much meaning. And again, relying on those practices of sustainability that started, in that family so many generations ago. So those are some examples of people on the land, but like there are also people working up and down the food system, which is exciting. So like there's a young woman in New York who started a business connecting, like she's like aggregating food from farms within 500 miles of New York City and aggregating it together in the city, and then being able to offer a CSA program so that consumers in New York can get all this regional and local food. So building her business that way. There's people working to connect financial resources, capital, and other lending support to regenerative projects and farms and all that. So that's really exciting as well. So, we need that kind of boost to the system to kind of get a lot of these projects and farms up and running. And then there's people working on policy. I just spoke with, last month, I guess it's been 2 months now, in DC. I did an appearance with Vanessa Garcia Polanco. She's in the book as well. She works for the National Young Farmers Coalition. So like helping regenerative become a pillar of that and helping the next generation have policies that support them as they enter the system. So it's really up and down, from big brands all the way to, people growing food just for their local communities. There's change happening at so many different levels.
Now, I understand too that you kind of make your home in the space of creative nonfiction and through storytelling as the lens. I really wanted to help my audience understand who this book is written for, and also how you're using storytelling in a unique way to make perhaps the learnings more digestible for other people, for people outside of the food space, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So we've been talking as a culture about, the information gap between our scientists or our people who are doing a lot of this technical work and the public being able to understand it. And in that gap, misinformation, disinformation, confusion can grow. So that's one reason I love being a storyteller, is that I can kind of go into that space between the world of regen ag and all the other systems that are participating in that movement and the reader. So I envision my reader for this book as just your everyday person who is thinking, is there something that I can do to better support my health through food? Is there ways that I can understand how agriculture can be beneficial for the environment? Or how can this food system that we all participate in, how could that be better? What could I learn about it? So that's my typical reader in mind. But I also write with people like my parents, my family, my community that I grew up in mind as well, because I want that to be a book that's inspiring and useful also for people on the land, people involved in agriculture, to say, others have done this, I could do it, I could transition. And I could see myself in these stories. And of course, with this book being a focus on women, I want women, in the food system and not anywhere, here in our country, but it's, so many women driving so much change. So I just want them to see themselves in this movement, and then more broadly be inspired to just enact social change any way that they can.
I wanted to bring up an idea that I had. I was reading this book. And that is probably a combination of other people I've connected with over the course of the last few years running this podcast, one of whom is June Jo Lee. And she and her husband have a publishing company. She's a food ethnographer. And she has actually highlighted the stories of a few more natural, organic style farmers, almost like it's a deep dive into someone who may be lesser known, but is notable in their particular area, right? So it's kind of like a change maker series in a way. And, some of them are better known, like Roy Choi. She did a book on Roy Choi. And then this other woman, I'm forgetting her last name, but Ava's Farm, I think is the name of that book. And I'll correct it and put it up as a link. But as I was reading through a few chapters of this book, I thought, this could be a children's book series. And no, because if you're to actually think about, women in farming, I think so seldom do we hear that story, except when, Leah Penniman gets on stage and talks about soil fire farms, I always have difficulty soul fire farms. I want to say soil. We don't hear from that many women. Frankly, we just don't. So I love that concept. I think maybe even a coloring book or something that could engage a younger audience and get them thinking as young people about engaging in farming beyond just their own personal garden at home.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely need the next generation to get excited about food, get excited about sustainability, and to their credit, they are. Young people are seeing what's going on with climate change. They are making healthier food decisions. They're seeing what's been happening to their parents, to their grandparents, and the ways that people are ill in our society. So absolutely, I mean, the more we can engage young people, the better.
Yeah. Now, what do you think are the common threads between the women that you have profiled, if there are any that really kind of shine through despite their individual differences? And what lessons do you think we can learn from them?
I mean, all these women are thinking about the next generation. They're thinking about the world beyond their time on this earth, and they're making decisions accordingly. They're taking a holistic view of, not only their lives and their children's lives, but our kind of shared life on this planet. And that's what I think really distinguishes them and also unites them, even, distinguishes them from their conventional counterparts and unites them in the sense of we're all in this together, even though I might be participating or moving in a different part of the system than you, I'm still part of the greater whole. So that type of thinking is, and research backs this up, really common among women leaders to think that way, to be able to take in the whole picture and not just sort of look at things narrowly, like profit only or growth only or what have you, and being able to use resources carefully. So yeah, and prioritizing collaboration. None of these women that I spoke with were, eager for the spotlight and wanting it to be a savior narrative of what they're doing. In many cases, they were like, I don't know, are you sure you want to interview me? Like someone else is doing even more better work over here, or, they very much resist that. So they see their work as in collaboration with people that they know and don't to make the world a better place. So as corny as that might sound, it really is important to them.
I wonder if we could talk for a moment about systematic barriers. What challenges do you believe, or have you found, that women farmers still face when entering or leading in regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, a number of barriers still exist. And one barrier that is significant for men and women alike is a regenerative financing system. These folks are trying to access, capital to start or to transition or to just pay their bills, get insurance, and often they are kept out of that system because they don't farm correctly, quote unquote. They don't use, even though regenerative is often, and studies have shown this, more profitable per acre than we would compare conventional, still there is skepticism within the finance industry of lending to these folks. So we've got to really fix that problem. we need to shrink our food chain down to a more manageable size. Like we have this like national and global food chains where we need to really build in the middle, that regional food chain in order to prioritize mid-sized farmers. We have a lot of really amazing small-scale farmers, and then we've got a small number of really, really big farmers. We need to get that middle, and that's where regenerative really thrives. I mean, not that it can't on small and large scales, but it can really thrive in that middle ground. The everyday family farmer, people like my parents, for instance, their size of farm. So getting systems in place to get their offputs from the farm into the food system without going into that national global chain. Oh boy, what else?
I mean, I want to see, I don't know if you have a depth of knowledge as it relates to the Farm Bill.
I mean, yeah, a little bit, but I mean, it's right now, it's just stuck, I mean,
Right.
there is no Farm Bill right now. And it's so frustrating for farmers. How can they plan? And
it's like the Farm Bill exists, but it's not being,
yeah.
money's not getting distributed as it was promised.
Right.
And so now they
Mm-hmm.
can't plan and they're
Yep.
stuck. I wondered, and this is something I didn't have purview to, but venture capital, generally speaking, only as a percent of the whole, only 2% of VC funds go to female-led businesses. And I didn't know if regenerative farming is a space where venture capital even really pays attention or comes in. It seems to be more in the branded finished goods space that they seem to really kind of have their attention at the present moment, at least from what I've seen. So I wonder what type of capital they're left with. I mean, is it small business loans, bank loans, angel investors? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so it seems to be that, yeah, you're right. A lot of this kind of VC money is going to larger projects. And so we do see that entering, maybe some larger farm or larger regenerative operations. But right, for the most part, yeah, absolutely. We're looking at more flexible lending coming from some of these funds so that, the terms are more realistic for the time horizon that it takes to a regenerative operation to, fully become profitable. Also, we're seeing, like family institutions, family houses that are using that capital for like social investing, so that's really been important as well. And also, we're trying to get, many people are trying to get our more traditional institutions, the USDA, those types of things to incorporate and welcome the regenerative operators as well. So hopefully that can continue to change. We saw some of that in the last administration, special funding for regenerative, but that's gone or is shortly probably to be out the door. So we're going to be moving toward more, the family institutions and the kind of social impact investing.
Now, to your knowledge, how long does a farm have to tread water before they become profitable or are yielding the same crops that they did prior when they shift to regenerative? Is it 1 year, 2 years? What does that horizon typically look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's going to vary a lot depending on the operation, what they're trying to grow or produce, the size of their operation, their debt situation, whether they own land, whether they rent. But so maybe I'll talk about it in terms of people who are transitioning an industrial operation to regenerative. That's going to take a few years for the soil to recover. Because if you think about it, most industrial operations are working on pretty dead soil. Like it takes a lot of fertilizer to make it be productive. It takes a lot of chemicals to manage the pests and the weeds, things like that. So when you start to remove those things, you're going to see a drop in yields at the beginning. But as that soil health and the ecological health improve with some time, then those yields are just going to go up. And of course, your input costs are going way, way down, which is exciting as well. So the more you can shift that balance and take more profit for yourself, you're looking at a few years to get to that place. And of course, and some operations may be able to make the transition faster. Some might take longer depending on how comfortable they are with a lot of these practices. Because we have to remember, a lot of our farmers are several generations now away from the type of farming that we would call regenerative, that they don't really have that knowledge anymore. They do need to go through that learning experience and readjusting to a non-chemical intensive and, kind of automated and industrial large scale, monoculture cropping and livestock operations. And so there's that time too that it will take for producers to get to know their land again and to really get to know their environment in a way that they maybe haven't before.
Now, the gender gap in farming is quite wide. Generally speaking, the people that are known as leaders in farming are men, and often white men. I wonder if you see a different perspective specifically in this mid-sized farm, or if it's more of the same.
So where we're seeing greater participation with women in the system is in young farmers, like new and beginning farmers who have 10 years or less of experience, which is exciting. There's more diversity and more women represented in those numbers. And when we then look at, sort of the regenerative and organic space, those areas tend to be more diverse as well when you compare it to industrial. So that's the most exciting part for me is the young people, because they are, of course, the people who are going to lead change. And I should say, we're at a critical moment in terms of young people and farm transition. Our farmers are aging out. We're going to have a pretty big exchange, massive land changing of hands within the next 10 years or so. And women own almost half the farmland in America. So that's exciting. Women could be a catalyst for getting people on the land who have, regenerative values, young people who want to have a chance to own or rent land that they may not have had before, new farmers, people without that generations of experience. So that, we have opportunities ahead as well for the next generation and increasing that representation.
Yeah, hopefully they just don't get squeezed out by the large conglomerates like Cargill, wanting to buy them up. Because I think that can also be tempting, because farming is not an easy path. I was actually just watching a news story yesterday about suicide rates among farmers, and it's still among the highest of all professions in the United States. So, people just simply on their farms having a hard time making it work, a lot of pride built up in their work, often having been, like, let's say, the third or fourth generation farmer and feeling like it's their fault that they're failing, when really the cards have been stacked against them, and, they've inherited debt or had to take on debt, and now are facing more troubling times with climate change and also with insecure funding from the Farm Bill that had somewhat disappeared. So we're in this space that can feel very tenuous. And I feel a need to help figure out in some way how we can bridge that gap, how we can get more of the right funds to the right people so that they can do the work without feeling like they're just staring up Mount Everest every morning, Mm-hmm. So it's just something to be aware of. And I have intense hope too for the youth and the next generation coming in, the culture shifts towards something that is more regenerative, that is glyphosate free, awareness even around the fact that glyphosate is sprayed on grains, even if it's not used during the growing cycle, just to make sure that they ripen or dry, basically kill all the wheat at the same time so they can harvest it at the same time with one combine contract. And this gets into the complexities of farming. I mean, many times it's just that they have all these fields. They want them all to be ripe at the same time so they can quickly harvest at the same time and then run through processing to have economies of scale built into every step of their farming. But it's also because we monocrop, and we monocrop things like wheat, we monocrop things like corn and soybeans. And so it gets to a space where we've just looked at it as an extractive type of business, trying to get as much out of the land as quickly as possible, and then let the field go fallow for a season and come back. In some cases, not even do that. They just spray more fertilizer on the ground. What other culture shifts do you think we're going to need to help us get there to this more regenerative future?
I think we're going to have to reorient our view of what profit is. that profit is not just money. Money is important. We know our farm families deserve to have living wages and have good lives and not have corporations and, big ag take all of their profit. But we also need to look at profit in terms of, what is good for my soil resource, my ecology, what is good for the next generation, what is good for our health, the health of the people who eat the food that's coming off the land, the health of my farm, and what's good for enduring climate change. Like how do I increase quote unquote profit when it comes to resilience? How can I build in more resilience into my farm? So I think changing what we think of as profit would be a huge mindset, and that's going to be very difficult, for a lot of Americans who have been trained since their earliest times to really kind of think about things in a dollars and cents way. And I get it, and consumers too need to shift their mindset in terms of what does food do for me, and what do I do to make good food choices that support not only my farmers but the planet that we share. Because we have been trained, much like farmers, to think about things in the dollars and cents. Like, what's the cheapest thing I can buy? How can I get to the think inflation. We don't have living wages for anyone. We have so many people under so much stress, and so I get that there are limitations, but still we need to acknowledge that food is not a resource that should be squandered. That people deserve to be paid for their labor. And that whole adage of like, if you don't pay a lot, you don't get a lot. And it's true. You might get a lot of, quantity of food, but you won't get a lot of quality the cheaper you go. So I hope that we can change our mindset around that too.
Well, I interviewed Josh Tickle, who is the filmmaker behind Common Ground and Kiss the Ground recently, earlier this year, like January, right? Cool. And he shared that the farmer is essentially getting about 8 cents on the dollar and the food space of all the profits that are made. So if you consider that, where is that 92 cents going? It's going to everybody in the middle. It's certainly not going to the farmer. So farmers are essentially paid commodity prices for their food that they produce by the bushel or however it's measured, right? And then you have to think about where else the money goes. It goes into transportation. It goes to the pockets of the larger aggregators that might be selling the product via wholesale, because often the farmers they don't own all of that chain. They don't necessarily have the relationship with the retailer that is going to be selling their product. They're not going direct. So it goes into distribution, and then from there it gets plussed out or packaged in certain ways to get to individual stakeholders. And that ultimately means that the people making the money are essentially not at the beginning of that growth cycle. And so, how can we correct that? We can correct that, each of us, by doing things like supporting local businesses more, by participating in CSAs, but that's not at scale, and that's not how you buy your grains. So, how do we each do that? I mean, do you see a way beyond systemic change?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, I guess it might be a segue into talking about one chapter in the book, which is a group of women that are working on solving that exact issue. They have this company called Veritable Vegetable, and they, source produce from the California area. And their whole slogan is food for people, not for profit. And so they always pay their farmers very, very, fairly. And prioritize those relationships. They know who their farmers are, and they are not just cogs in the wheel. And then on the other end, they're able to provide, responsibly grown, often organic food to, all kinds of outlets, large and small throughout the state of California and beyond. So they're also, women-owned, women-led, and they've been in business since the 70s. So it's clearly a business model that works. And they don't pay their CEOs, which are 3 women. They do not pay those themselves, exorbitant, wages and salaries compared to their everyday workers. It's like 3 to 1. Whereas in corporate America, it's like, I'm not even going to, I mean, I have it cited in the book, but it's like, 300 to 1 or something. So like,
Yeah, on the very high end, if you're
Yeah,
talking the top
yeah,
500 companies, yeah, it's like 65 plus to
yeah.
one. I mean,
It's
65 is
crazy.
the low end. So when you think about that, for every dollar the lowest paid employee on their
Hmm.
staff gets, that CEO gets 65 on the low end. It makes no
Wild.
sense. It's just not
No.
sustainable. And this is actually everything that feeds the societal problems that we've seen erupt over the last several decades. It wasn't
Hmm.
always like this. And that's the thing that I want people to remember. If we even go back just to the 70s, like when this veritable vegetable, company got their start, you didn't see that level of atrocious disparity. And
Hmm.
so there are a few companies that are leading the way, one in the finance space that pays his lowest paid employee something like $70,000 a year and only takes a 3 or 4x of the lowest paid employee as his salary. There's another that's out of the natural product space in soaps, and that is Dr. Bronner's. Their CEO, family owned and operated over many years, is a Bronner, right? So, like, grandchild of the person who founded it, only takes a salary of 5x the lowest paid employee. And that is something that you just don't see much anymore. It almost seems to be it's the concept is profits at any cost, and we need the CEO who's going to be available 24/7 and do XYZ in order for us to succeed. But really, they're just answering to Wall Street, and they're not answering to the people. So at the end of the day, what do? Right? We've got to make that change. We've got to shift the mindset to get to a space where, you know, the doctor and the person working at the Hertz rental car counter don't live completely separate lives, because they never get a chance to interact, essentially, other than when the doctor goes up to the Hertz counter. Do you see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? It's like
Yeah.
we've just created a system that is so unequal, and it's not going to be great for anybody long term.
Yeah, I was just, brushing up on my Robin Wall Kimmerer the other day, and she's got this beautiful book, The Service Berry, and has talked about this for many years. But the idea that, reciprocity is a foundational principle that we ought to live by, and the idea that we're living in a scarcity mindset when we have abundance. We don't need to farm in such a way that extracts or that relies, on taking advantage of some for the betterment of others. I mean, we have everything that we need to survive. It's just like you said, disparity. It's not. We just don't have, you know, our resources equally accessible to everybody in a meaningful way.
Well, you brought up one of my favorite authors and researchers. She is also a creative nonfiction storyteller, right? So it makes sense that you would bring her up. I really enjoy her work. I have listened to the audiobook for Braided Sweetgrass probably a dozen times. And one of my favorite essays from that book is called The Three Sisters.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with it, but really it speaks to reciprocity and just this indigenous knowledge that we seem to have just abandoned, of being able to grow corn with beans. Beans fix nitrogen into the soil which the corn needs to grow, right?
Right.
And then also squash. And so the indigenous people would make a gift of these three seeds wrapped in corn husk to people as a measure of providing bounty for their future, of saying, this is abundance. I'm giving you something where these three sisters can collaborate and give you food for the winter. This would literally help people survive famine, or like if they had a not great year, having these three plants growing together. The squash being a good ground cover, right? Keeping more of the
Mm-hmm.
moisture in the soil. The stalks of the corn growing vertical and being great climbing media for the beans, right? And the beans
Mm-hmm.
fixing nitrogen to the soil. So, I mean, heck, if you love nonfiction, if you love storytelling, I encourage you to read Braided Sweetgrass or listen to the book. Robin Wall Kimmerer actually narrates it very skillfully. I love her voice. And I'm just blanking on the name of the other you just mentioned. What was that?
Her newest one is called The Service Berry. It's a
The
pretty
Service
short
Berry.
book. It's more like a long essay, and it kind of expands on some of the themes that are in Braiding Sweetgrass. But yeah, also one of my favorites to read, to teach, to use as a model.
And she has plenty of, online talks that she's given to really to help people think beyond their own specific little spot in the world. Now, as we talk about people like Robin Wall Kimmerer, I wondered if you wanted to delve for a moment into your creative process. What do you think the most challenging parts of your storytelling as it relates to From the Ground Up were, and why?
Yeah, I mean, it's always challenging to take a big idea or a big project, a big problem, a big opportunity, and kind of break it into manageable parts so that you can explore it, in the way that it needs to be done. So I think one of the biggest challenges in writing the book is just being able to, keep the larger issues and arguments and ideas in mind, while also being able to zoom in on particular stories that help illustrate some of the concepts, or, give you a sense that you can complete the book, and so that you can finish it, because sometimes it can seem a little bit daunting, right, to do a larger project. So that was one challenge, but luckily I was able to devote time to writing. I stepped away from my teaching briefly as well, so I was able to finish it. So that was good. In terms of my practice, I mean, I'm not one of those writers who has like a hard and fast, I write every day from, 9 to noon or anything like that. I write when I can. I write when I get that gift of time. And I just try to stay open to ideas, because, the more you can be perceptive and the more you can be open and kind of engaged with the world and observant, things will come to you. So I try to make sure I'm feeding my creative life, in ways that can be generative later, for my work. So, this particular book is pretty researched. It's telling other people's stories. It's literary journalism. If we had to give it a name, I often write more, personal essays, more, more creative nonfiction that maybe has got more of that creative in it as well. So, in terms of experimentation or language, lyricism, and things like that. So I just try to stay to be a dynamic writer, someone who writes, different forms, different genres within nonfiction, and, to kind of keep myself in the game in different ways.
Very cool. Do you have specific advice that you would give other writers or activists that are seeking to enter this justice and ecology world with their work?
That's a really great question about how to engage in this work. First, consult the experts, because I like to think of myself or hope that I have what it takes to do the writing part. But I always need to lean on other people for knowledge, and, make sure that I can fill in as many gaps in my own understanding when I'm taking on a project as possible. So, don't be afraid to ask people for their insights, their advice, and, if it doesn't make it into the project, it goes into your background knowledge. So that's just super important to make sure that you're doing that. Get writers that you trust and readers that you trust to look over your work as well. Never put anything out there without another set of eyes on things, because consulting people can help you make your work better and more well-rounded, and do the things that you want to do with it, achieve the type of writing that you want to achieve. And I just read. You've got to read widely, because it's, you have to know what's out there, what's already been said, what's already been done, and then how you want to incorporate other people as models into your own style, and where you might want to try something new. So
I love all of those answers. Thank you so much. Really great, helpful tips. Now, for my listeners who might not be quite as technical or wanting to embark on a writing or activism journey quite yet, maybe it's outside their comfort zone. So what's one thing someone listening today can do to support a more just and regenerative food system right where they are?
One thing, vote. Vote for people who reflect the type of food system that you want to see in the world. If I had to boil it down to one thing, that would be it.
It's hard to know. So often it seems like food isn't the top subject that they're covering too.
Yeah, totally. I guess by that I would expand to just say that, even if the politician or person that you're voting for doesn't talk specifically about, regen ag, for instance, look at the values that that person has. Are they a person that's going to care about the natural world? It's going to care about people. It's going to care about families, things like health, nutrition, or just, justice, sustainability, climate. That's the type of person that's going to be more effective when it comes to building the political kind of systems and institutions that we need to orient regen ag. So you're right. Even if the person is not, that's not a huge part of their platform. Think about the ways that regen ag translates and touches all those other issue areas that a voter might be more engaged in, or that politician might be talking about a little bit more.
Right. I would agree with you. I think there are some, let's just call them oppositional forces, though, even within each side. So it's really hard to know. Like, for instance, I know a lot of people in the regen ag space have a lot of hope for RFK and his role in our present administration. And yet the present administration seems to be stripping funding from the sorts of projects that will help regenerative agriculture, while also depleting things like our open spaces by opening them for mineral resource and tree resource extraction, which are directly at odds with regenerative agriculture. So, these dichotomies exist. And I think you have to think about top of the ticket and everybody up and down the line. What are the ethics of these individuals? How do they see the natural world? I think even just asking that question, how do they see the natural world? Do they see it as a resource to be mined or as an ecosystem to be managed? Because those two things are very different.
Yeah, totally. Agreed. Agreed.
Okay. And I don't know that you can manage Earth necessarily. At the end, the climate's going to manage us one way or the other. So.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right. And that's the sad thing, is that, we're in our window to, be complacent is rapidly closing. And pretty soon, and already people are having to make decisions based on climate. And we're going to be making a lot of things, whether it's managed retreat from our coasts, whether it's changing our farming system, whether it is, changing how we manage our forest lands, and so much. So our choices are rapidly narrowing. So I think some of these decisions are going to get made, and I hope that it doesn't take that long. But at some point, we're going to have no choice but to farm more sustainably, because you can't do that. When you have no soil, there's no other choice.
Yep. Because you can't feed the masses on things that are grown in vertical farms indoors. That's just not
exactly
all the grains and everything else that we eat. You just can't farm it that way. Well, what's next for you? As we round out this conversation, I really was hoping to learn if there's a specific project you're working on or something that you see on the horizon, any new writing projects or collaborations that we should watch out for.
Yeah. So I am working on writing more about my growing up, sort of like memoir type writing. I'm always going to stay engaged in the regen ag world, and I still very much am, and we'll probably write about it in other ways. But I'm probably, when it comes to a larger project, like book project, I'm thinking more of a collection of essays that are more personal and memoir in nature. So that's next for me. But who knows where things will take me. I always try to find, like I said, stay open to new things. So I've got a lot of other ideas as well, and hopefully more will continue to present themselves.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I have to say, I love the work in your book, and I've been kind of enjoying each essay within it, or each chapter, I should say, with my morning coffee in the morning. And I'm almost, when you love a really great book and you don't want it to end, I'm actually having that experience reading your book, which has happened a few times in nonfiction space, but usually it's in the fiction space where I feel like that. So this creative nonfiction is something that's somewhat new to me. I'd always read more like textbook or fiction and perhaps poetry, but not a lot between those things. And I really am enjoying it. I'm going to go ahead and include links to both of your books and your webpage directly with show notes. Is there any other closing thought you'd like to leave our audience with?
Well, thank you. That's so kind. I'm glad you're enjoying the book. And I would just say to leave your audience, thanks for listening. Stay engaged with Regen Ag. Keep, watch out for what big changes are coming. I hope that, they'll become more visible to you as a consumer. But don't forget to care. continue caring.
Yeah. Care more, be better. That's the name of the show after all.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It was been really, really fun chatting with you.
What a treat to be able to bond with someone over a shared passion. For everyone tuning in, remember, by subscribing to this podcast, you can also help us to create a more green world and help regenerate Earth. Simply follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or sign up for our newsletter at caremorebebetter.com. When you do, you'll be the first to know when new episodes just like this one drop. I share resources with you. Sometimes there are action items like contacting your congressperson about a specific initiative, and sometimes just a little tip or a resource for you that I've discovered. So far, we've planted close to 9,000 trees as part of this effort, and I just want to thank all of you for being part of that. It's through collaborations like this one, through sheer will, and by sharing stories like those told by Stephanie Anderson today and in her book, In From the Ground Up, that we can inspire more people to care and build a better, more regenerative future. So if you love today's episodes, please share it with your friends. Let's get more ears and more eyes on this subject. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.